In a quiet and icy part of Alaska, far from cities and people, there was a secret research facility. This place was hidden deep in the wilderness, surrounded by snow-covered mountains and freezing winds. Inside, a team of scientists worked day and night, studying something strange and mysterious, an alien artifact. No one knew where it had come from, but it had been found inside a crashed spacecraft that had fallen to Earth years ago. Dr. Alan Carter was the leader of the team. He was a tall man with gray hair and glasses, always wearing a white lab coat. Alan had spent most of his life studying biology, especially how living things worked. He was excited about the artifact because it wasn't like anything he had ever seen before. It was smooth, black, and shaped like a sphere, about the size of a basketball. But what made it truly special was the faint blue glow that pulsed from inside it every few seconds. The artifact also gave off strange electromagnetic waves that seemed to react when they touched living things. Alan's assistant, Rachel Moore, was younger than him, but just as smart. She had short brown hair and wore glasses that often slid down her nose when she leaned over her notes. Rachel helped Alan set up experiments to figure out what the artifact could do. Together, they decided to test its effects on human tissue samples. These were tiny pieces of skin, muscle, and other parts taken from volunteers who had agreed to help with the research. At first, nothing seemed unusual. The artifact sat quietly on the lab table, glowing softly. But when Alan placed the tissue samples close to it, something incredible happened. The cells in the samples started to move faster than anyone had ever seen before. Wounds that would normally take days or weeks to heal closed up completely within minutes. Old and damaged cells were replaced by fresh, healthy ones. It was as if the artifact had the power to turn back time for living things. The scientists were amazed. "This could change everything," Alan said, his voice filled with excitement. "Imagine being able to cure diseases, fix injuries instantly, or even stop aging altogether." Rachel nodded, but she felt a little uneasy. She couldn't explain why, but something about the artifact didn't feel right. Still, she kept her thoughts to herself and continued helping Alan with the tests. One day, a young engineer named Chris Dawson walked into the lab. Chris was in his late 20s, with messy blonde hair and a friendly smile. He had heard about the experiments and wanted to help. "I'm not afraid to try new things," he said confidently. "If this thing can make me stronger or healthier, count me in." Alan hesitated at first. Testing the artifact on live humans was risky, but Chris insisted he was fine with it. After signing some papers, Chris became the first person to be exposed to the artifact's energy. At first, nothing seemed to happen. Chris stood near the sphere for several minutes while Alan and Rachel watched closely. Then suddenly, Chris blinked and looked down at his hand. A small cut he'd had on his finger since yesterday was gone, as if it had never existed. Over the next few hours, more changes began to show. Chris noticed his vision was sharper, his hearing clearer, and his muscles felt stronger. He could lift heavy equipment without breaking a sweat and see details in the dark corners of the lab. Alan was thrilled. "This is groundbreaking," he exclaimed. "We're witnessing the next step in human evolution." But Rachel wasn't so sure. While everyone celebrated the discovery, she stayed late in the lab, looking through the data. Something about the way Chris's body was changing worried her. His cells weren't just healing, they were rewriting themselves, forming patterns she didn't recognize. Was this really progress, or was it something else entirely? As the snowstorm outside grew fiercer, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that they were playing with forces they didn't fully understand. The days following Chris Dawson's exposure to the alien artifact were filled with both excitement and unease. At first, everything seemed fine. Chris felt stronger, faster, and more alive than ever before. He could run miles without getting tired, lift objects that would normally require two people, and even see clearly in the dim light of the research facility. The scientists were thrilled with the results, especially Dr. Alan Carter, who saw this as proof of his theories about the artifact's potential. Chris became the center of attention in the lab. Everyone wanted to ask him questions or observe how his body was changing. Alan conducted test after test, measuring Chris's strength, reflexes, and healing abilities. Each time, the results were astonishing. A bruise on Chris's arm disappeared overnight. A small burn from a hot cup healed in minutes. It was as if the artifact had unlocked a hidden power within him. But not everything was perfect. As the days went by, Chris began to notice strange things happening to his mind and body. He started having vivid dreams that felt more like memories, images of places he'd never been and faces he didn't recognize. Sometimes, he woke up drenched in sweat, his heart racing, unsure if what he had seen was real or just a nightmare. During the day, he struggled to focus. Sounds seemed louder, smells sharper, and lights brighter. Even the hum of the fluorescent bulbs in the lab made his head ache. One evening, while working late, Chris accidentally crushed a metal pipe in his hands. He hadn't meant to. He was just trying to fix a leak. But the thin metal bent and snapped under his grip as if it were made of paper. Staring at the mangled piece of pipe, Chris felt a wave of panic. His hands trembled as he set it down, and he quickly left the room before anyone could see what had happened. The next morning, during a meeting with the team, Chris lost his temper for no reason. Emily Lewis, one of the researchers, had asked him a simple question about how he was feeling. Instead of answering calmly, Chris snapped at her, his voice sharp and angry. "Why do you keep asking me that? I'm fine," he shouted, slamming his fist on the table. The sound echoed through the room, startling everyone. Emily looked hurt, and Alan frowned, but no one said anything. After a moment of awkward silence, Chris apologized and left the room, embarrassed by his outburst. Rachel Moore watched all of this with growing concern. She had noticed subtle changes in Chris's behavior and physical appearance. His eyes, once a soft brown, now had an odd golden tint when the light hit them just right. His skin seemed tougher, almost leathery in texture, and there were faint patterns on his arms that looked like scars but weren't. Most troubling of all, the data she collected showed that Chris's DNA was undergoing rapid mutations. Entire sections of his genetic code were being rewritten, forming sequences that didn't match anything in human biology. Rachel tried to talk to Alan about her findings. "We need to stop these experiments," she said one night in the lab. "This isn't just healing or enhancement. It's something else entirely. We don't know what we're dealing with." Alan shook his head, unwilling to listen. "You're overreacting," he replied. "This is the most important discovery of our lifetime. Think about what it could mean for humanity. We can't give up now." Rachel sighed, frustrated but unable to convince him. She decided to take matters into her own hands. Late at night, when everyone else had gone to bed, she stayed in the lab, studying the artifact and analyzing Chris's test results. The more she learned, the more worried she became. The artifact wasn't just affecting Chris. It was changing him into something different, something that might not be fully human anymore. As the snowstorm outside raged on, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that they were heading toward disaster. Chris's condition was worsening, and the team was too blinded by ambition to see it. Something had to be done before it was too late. But what could she do alone? As the days turned into a week, Chris Dawson's transformation became harder to ignore. His once friendly demeanor had shifted into something darker and unpredictable. The golden tint in his eyes grew brighter, and his movements were quicker, almost too fluid. Even his voice had changed. It was deeper, with an edge that made people uneasy. The other scientists began to avoid him, whispering among themselves about what was happening. Dr. Alan Carter, however, refused to see the warning signs. He was convinced that the changes in Chris were part of the process, a necessary step toward unlocking the artifact's full potential. "This is evolution," he told Rachel one morning as they reviewed the latest data. "Chris is becoming something greater than human. We're witnessing history." Rachel didn't share his enthusiasm. She spent her nights poring over the test results, searching for answers. What she found only deepened her fears. Chris's DNA was no longer entirely human. Strange sequences, unlike anything in any known database, were spreading through his genetic code like a virus. These new patterns seemed to be rewriting his body at a fundamental level, altering not just his physical traits but also his mind. Rachel worried that Chris might lose control, or worse, that he might already have. One evening, Chris approached Rachel in the lab. His presence startled her. She hadn't heard him come in. "I need your help," he said quietly, his voice trembling. For a moment, he looked like the old Chris, the kind and easygoing engineer she had first met. But then his expression hardened, and his glowing eyes locked onto hers. "Something's wrong with me. I can feel it. My thoughts, they're not my own." Rachel hesitated, unsure how to respond. She wanted to comfort him, but she also knew the truth. There might be nothing she could do to stop what was happening. Still, she nodded and promised to keep studying the artifact, hoping to find a way to reverse its effects. The tension in the facility reached a breaking point during a routine meeting. Alan stood at the front of the room, presenting his latest findings. He spoke passionately about the possibilities of using the artifact to enhance humanity on a global scale. "Imagine a world without illness, without weakness," he said, his voice filled with excitement. "We can create a better version of ourselves." Emily Lewis, who had been quiet for days, finally spoke up. "At what cost?" she asked, her tone sharp. "Look at Chris. He's not the same person anymore. How do we know this won't happen to everyone else? What if we're making monsters instead of miracles?" Alan frowned, clearly annoyed by her interruption. "You're letting fear cloud your judgment," he snapped. "This is science, not superstition. We can't let irrational worries hold us back." Before Emily could reply, Chris suddenly stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Everyone turned to look at him, startled. His hands were clenched into fists, and his breathing was heavy. "You don't understand," he said, his voice low and strained. "It's not just changing me. It's taking over. I can feel it inside me, twisting everything. I'm not sure how much longer I can fight it." The room fell silent. No one knew what to say. Chris stared at them for a moment, his golden eyes blazing, before storming out of the room. The door slammed shut behind him, leaving the others to sit in stunned silence. After the meeting, Rachel decided to take action. She couldn't rely on Alan to stop the experiments. He was too obsessed with proving his theories. Instead, she began secretly gathering evidence. She copied all the data from the lab computers onto a portable drive, documenting every change in Chris and the artifact's effects. If things got worse, she wanted to have proof of what was happening. That night, as she worked alone in the lab, Rachel heard footsteps outside. She froze, listening carefully. The sound was faint but deliberate, moving closer to the building. Peering out the window, she saw shadows moving in the snowstorm. It was Chris, pacing back and forth like a restless animal. His silhouette was distorted, his movements jerky and unnatural. Rachel felt a chill run down her spine. Whatever the artifact was doing to Chris, it wasn't done yet, and she feared that stopping it might already be impossible. The next morning, the research facility was buzzing with tension. Chris hadn't returned to the lab after his outburst the previous night, and no one had seen him since. Dr. Alan Carter tried to downplay the situation, insisting that Chris was probably just upset and needed time to cool off. But Rachel Moore knew better. She had watched him pacing outside in the snowstorm, his movements strange and unnatural. Something inside her told her this wasn't just stress or frustration. It was something far more dangerous. By midday, the team decided they couldn't ignore Chris's disappearance any longer. Security Officer Daniel Hughes volunteered to lead a search party. A tall, broad-shouldered man with a calm demeanor, Daniel was trusted by everyone at the facility. He gathered a small group, including Emily Lewis, who insisted on coming despite her fear. Rachel wanted to join them too, but Alan stopped her, saying someone needed to stay behind to monitor the artifact. Before heading out, Daniel armed himself with a tranquilizer gun, just in case things got out of hand. "We don't know what we're dealing with," he said firmly. "Stay alert and stick together." With that, the group bundled up in heavy coats and stepped outside into the freezing wilderness. The snowstorm had died down, leaving the landscape eerily quiet. The icy wind bit at their faces as they trudged through knee-deep snow, calling out Chris's name. At first, there was no sign of him, just endless white stretching in every direction. But as they moved deeper into the tundra, they began to notice strange disturbances. Trees were bent and broken, their thick trunks snapped like twigs. Deep claw marks scared the frozen ground, and patches of blood stained the snow. Emily shivered, pulling her coat tighter around herself. "What could have done this?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Daniel didn't answer, but his grip tightened on the tranquilizer gun. As they pressed on, they found more evidence of Chris's presence, or at least what used to be Chris. Animal carcasses littered the area, picked clean with surgical precision. It was as if something had torn the creatures apart and devoured them without wasting a single piece. The sight made Emily sick to her stomach, and even Daniel looked uneasy. Finally, they came across fresh tracks. Large, uneven imprints in the snow that didn't resemble human footprints. They followed the trail cautiously, their breaths visible in the cold air. The farther they went, the more distorted the prints became, as if whatever made them was struggling to keep its balance. Then they saw him. Chris stood at the edge of a frozen lake, his back to them. His body was hunched over, his arms longer than they should have been. His skin glistened under the pale sunlight, stretched tight over muscles that seemed too large for his frame. When he turned his head slightly, they caught a glimpse of his glowing golden eyes. "Chris," Daniel called out, his voice steady but cautious. "It's us. We've come to help." For a moment, Chris didn't move. Then, slowly, he turned to face them. What they saw made Emily gasp in horror. His face was still recognizable, but only barely. His jaw was wider, filled with sharp, jagged teeth. His hands ended in long, curved claws, and his skin had taken on a rough, scaly texture. He looked like something between a man and a predator. "Please," Chris rasped, his voice low and guttural. "You shouldn't have come here." Daniel raised the tranquilizer gun, aiming carefully. "We're not here to hurt you, Chris. Just let us take you back." Chris shook his head violently, his movements jerky and unnatural. "I can't go back," he growled. I'm not me anymore." Before anyone could react, Chris lunged forward with terrifying speed. Daniel fired the tranquilizer dart, but it missed, embedding itself harmlessly in the snow. Emily screamed as Chris swiped at them with his claws, forcing the group to scatter. Daniel shouted for everyone to retreat, but the chaos had already begun. The team ran as fast as they could, slipping and stumbling through the snow. Behind them, Chris roared, a sound that was both human and animal, filled with anger and despair. As they reached the safety of the facility, Daniel slammed the heavy door shut and locked it, his face pale with shock. Inside, Rachel waited anxiously, her heart pounding. When she saw the look on their faces, she knew something terrible had happened. Whatever Chris had become, he was no longer part of their world. And now he was out there, alone in the wilderness. Back at the facility, the team was shaken. The encounter with Chris had left them frightened and exhausted. Emily sat in a corner of the lab, her face pale and her hands trembling as she clutched a mug of hot tea. Daniel paced back and forth, his tranquilizer gun still slung over his shoulder, replaying the scene in his mind. How could someone they knew, someone who had been so normal just weeks ago, turn into that? Rachel Moore tried to stay calm, but her mind raced with questions. What had the artifact done to Chris? Was he still in there somewhere, fighting to hold on to his humanity? Or had the alien technology completely taken over, turning him into something else entirely? She glanced at Dr. Alan Carter, who was standing by the window, staring out at the snowy wilderness. To her frustration, he didn't seem nearly as disturbed as the rest of them. "We need to bring him back," Alan said finally, breaking the silence. His voice was firm, almost dismissive, as if the danger they had just faced was nothing more than a minor setback. "He's still valuable to our research. We can learn so much from him." Gangle spun around, his face red with anger. "You think this is about research?" He snapped. "That thing out there isn't human anymore. It attacked us. If we go after it again, we might not come back." Alan waved his hand dismissively. "You're overreacting. Chris is still part of this team. He needs our help, not our fear." Rachel couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Alan, you saw what happened," she said sharply. "Chris is changing, and not in a good way. Whatever the artifact is doing, it's not just enhancing him, it's rewriting him. We don't even know if he can control himself anymore." For once, Alan didn't argue. Instead, he turned away, his jaw tight. Rachel could tell he was struggling with doubt, but his pride wouldn't let him admit it. He had poured everything into this project, and the thought of giving up must have felt like failure. But Rachel knew they were running out of time. Every moment they delayed, Chris grew stronger and more dangerous. While the others argued, Rachel made a decision. She couldn't rely on Alan or anyone else to stop this. Quietly, she slipped into the main lab where the artifact sat on its pedestal, glowing faintly. Its smooth surface seemed to pulse with energy, almost alive. Rachel stared at it, her heart pounding. This thing had caused all of this. Chris's transformation, the fear in the team, the chaos outside. It had to be stopped. She opened her laptop and began searching through the data she had collected. There had to be a way to deactivate the artifact, to shut down whatever power it was emitting. As she worked, she noticed something strange. A series of symbols etched into the base of the sphere. They looked like writing, but not in any language she recognized. She snapped photos of the symbols and sent them to an old colleague who specialized in ancient languages, hoping for answers. Meanwhile, the rest of the team tried to regroup. Emily suggested contacting the military, but Alan shot down the idea immediately. "We can't involve outsiders," he said firmly. "This discovery is too important. If word gets out, they'll take it away from us." "But people are dying," Emily shouted, tears welling up in her eyes. "Or worse, becoming monsters. Is your research really worth that?" The room fell silent. No one had the answer to that question. Later that night, Rachel stayed late in the lab, poring over the photos of the artifact symbols. Her colleague had replied, explaining that the markings resembled those found in ancient texts about a long-extinct alien race. According to legend, these aliens had created powerful tools to reshape life, but their experiments had gone horribly wrong, leading to their destruction. Rachel felt a chill run down her spine. Could the same thing be happening here? As she worked, she heard a faint noise outside the lab, a low growl, followed by the sound of claws scraping against metal. Her blood ran cold. Slowly, she turned toward the window. Through the frost-covered glass, she saw glowing golden eyes staring back at her. Chris, or what was left of him, was watching her. Rachel froze, her breath catching in her throat. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, the eyes blinked out of view, leaving her alone in the dim light of the lab. She knew then that Chris hadn't fled far. He was still close, drawn to the artifact, and to the people who had unleashed its power. Whatever happened next, Rachel realized, would depend on the choices they made now. And she wasn't sure they had much time left to make the right ones. Rachel's heart raced as she backed away from the window, her eyes still fixed on the spot where she had seen the glowing golden eyes. She wanted to call out to someone, but her voice caught in her throat. The lad was quiet except for the faint hum of the artifact, its blue glow casting eerie shadows on the walls. Finally, she forced herself to move, locking the door and pulling down the heavy blinds to block the view from outside. She knew Chris, or whatever he had become, was still out there, watching. The thought sent a shiver down her spine. Was he trying to get back inside? Or was he simply waiting? Rachel didn't know, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. The artifact's influence was spreading, and if they didn't act soon, things would spiral completely out of control. The next morning, the team gathered in the main meeting room. Tension filled the air as everyone shared what they had seen during the search. Daniel described Chris's monstrous appearance in detail, his voice low and serious. Emily listened quietly, her face pale, while Alan scribbled notes, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. Rachel stayed silent, her mind racing with thoughts about the ancient alien symbols she had discovered on the artifact. "We can't keep ignoring the risks," Daniel said finally, breaking the uneasy silence. "That thing out there isn't Chris anymore. It's dangerous, and it's getting stronger every day." Alan frowned, clearly annoyed. "And what do you suggest we do?" he asked sharply. "Destroy the artifact. Abandon years of research because of fear." "Yes," Emily burst out, her voice rising. "Fear is exactly why we should stop this. Look at what's happening. Chris is gone, and we're next if we don't end this now." Rachel nodded, deciding it was time to speak up. "I've been studying the artifact more closely," she said, pulling up the photos of the symbols on her laptop. "These markings, they're part of an ancient language linked to a race of aliens who experimented on other species. Their goal was to create perfect beings, but their experiments failed. They destroyed themselves, and maybe others too." The room went quiet as everyone processed her words. Even Alan looked troubled, though he quickly masked it with skepticism. "That's just a story," he muttered. "We have no proof it's true." "It's enough proof for me," Daniel shot back. "If there's even a chance this thing could turn us into whatever Chris has become, we need to shut it down. Now." For once, Alan didn't argue. He stared at the floor, his shoulders slumped. Rachel could see the conflict in his eyes. He was torn between his ambition and the growing realization that he might have made a terrible mistake. But before anyone could say more, the lights flickered, plunging the room into darkness. "What's going on?" Emily whispered, her voice trembling. Rachel grabbed a flashlight and turned it on, casting a weak beam across the room. The generators powering the facility were supposed to run non-stop, but something was wrong. As they stepped into the hallway, they heard a loud crash coming from the lab. The sound of breaking glass and metal scraping against metal echoed through the building. "Stay here," Daniel ordered, gripping his tranquilizer gun tightly. He motioned for Rachel to follow him as he cautiously approached the lab. When they reached the door, they saw it had been ripped off its hinges. Inside, the artifact sat untouched on its pedestal, but the equipment around it was smashed to pieces. Claw marks gouged deep into the walls, and the floor was littered with shards of broken glass. Rachel's stomach dropped when she noticed fresh tracks in the snow outside the shattered window. Large, uneven prints led away from the lab and disappeared into the wilderness. Chris had been here, and he wasn't alone. As they stood there, stunned, Rachel realized something else. The artifact's glow had grown brighter. Its pulsing light seemed faster, more erratic, as if it were reacting to something. Whatever Chris had done, it hadn't stopped him. It had made the artifact stronger. Back in the meeting room, the team debated their next move. Daniel insisted they destroy the artifact immediately, while Alan argued they needed more time to study it. Rachel listened quietly, her mind made up. If Alan wouldn't act, she would have to take matters into her own hands. The artifact wasn't just dangerous, it was alive, and it was feeding on them all. That night, Rachel made her decision. She couldn't wait any longer for Alan or the others to act. The artifact was growing more unstable by the hour, and Chris's attacks on the facility proved it wasn't just affecting one person. It was spreading its influence. If they didn't stop it soon, the entire team could end up like Chris or worse. Rachel knew what she had to do. even if it meant going against Alan and risking everything. While the others slept, Rachel slipped into the lab. She carried a small toolkit and a container of thermite, a powerful incendiary compound she had borrowed from the facility's engineering supplies. Her hands trembled as she worked, but she forced herself to focus. The artifact sat on its pedestal, glowing brighter than ever before, its energy pulsing in a rhythm that seemed almost alive. Rachel hesitated for a moment, staring at it. What if destroying it caused some kind of explosion? What if it retaliated somehow? But she pushed those thoughts aside. There was no other choice. She carefully placed the thermite around the base of the artifact, setting up a controlled burn that would melt the sphere and hopefully neutralize its power. As she worked, she noticed something strange. The symbols etched into the artifact's surface were shifting, rearranging themselves into new patterns. It was as if the object knew what she was doing and was trying to communicate or warn her. Rachel swallowed hard and kept going. She couldn't afford to second-guess herself now. Just as she finished setting up the thermite, she heard footsteps behind her. Spinning around, she saw Alan standing in the doorway, his face pale and his eyes wide with shock. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his voice low and angry. "I'm ending this," Rachel replied firmly. "We can't keep pretending this thing is safe. Look at what it's done to Chris. And to us. It's only a matter of time before it destroys everything." Alan stepped closer, his fists clenched. "You don't understand," he said, his voice trembling. "This is bigger than us, bigger than humanity. We can't just destroy it because we're scared." "It's not about fear," Rachel shot back. "It's about survival. You've been so focused on your research that you've ignored the consequences. If we don't stop this now, there won't be anything left to save." For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, without warning, Alan lunged forward, trying to grab the thermite. Rachel reacted quickly, shoving him away and activating the charge. A bright spark ignited, and flames began to spread across the base of the artifact. Alan stumbled back, his face twisted with panic. "You've ruined everything," he shouted, but Rachel didn't respond. She grabbed her toolkit and ran out of the lab, leaving him behind. As she fled down the hallway, the facility shook violently. The artifact let out a deafening hum, its glow intensifying until it filled the entire building with blinding light. Rachel covered her ears, struggling to stay on her feet as the walls cracked and the floor buckled beneath her. Whatever she had done, it was working, but the artifact wasn't going down without a fight. Outside, the rest of the team was awakened by the commotion. Daniel and Emily rushed toward the lab, their faces pale with fear. "What's happening?" Emily cried, clutching Daniel's arm. "It's the artifact," Rachel gasped as she joined them. "I tried to destroy it, but it's fighting back." Before anyone could say more, a massive explosion rocked the facility. Flames shot out of the windows, and chunks of the roof collapsed inward. The artifact's energy surged outward in a wave of heat and light, knocking everyone off their feet. For a moment, it felt like the world itself was tearing apart. When the chaos finally subsided, the team lay dazed in the snow, staring at what remained of the lab. The building was in ruins, smoke rising from the wreckage. The artifact was gone, reduced to ash and molten metal. But as Rachel looked around, she realized something else was missing. Alan. He hadn't made it out. The group sat in stunned silence, the weight of what had happened settling over them. They had stopped the artifact, but at a terrible cost. And deep down, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that they hadn't seen the last of it, or of Chris. Somewhere out there, in the icy wilderness, something unnatural still lingered, waiting for its chance to rise again. The morning after the explosion was cold and eerily quiet. The team huddled together outside the ruined facility, their breaths visible in the freezing air. Smoke still curled from the wreckage, and the smell of burnt metal lingered. No one spoke much. They were too shaken by what had happened. Alan was gone, lost in the destruction he had refused to leave behind. His obsession with the artifact had cost him everything, and it left a bitter taste in everyone's mouths. Rachel felt a heavy mix of relief and guilt. She had done what she believed was necessary, but the cost weighed heavily on her. The artifact was destroyed, yes, but at what price? The lad was in ruins, their research wiped out, and Alan, she didn't want to think about it. Emily sat nearby, wrapped in a blanket, staring blankly at the ground. Daniel paced back and forth, his tranquilizer gun slung over his shoulder, scanning the horizon as if expecting something, or someone, to appear. And then there was Chris, or whatever Chris had become. He hadn't been seen since the explosion, but Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there. The artifact might have been destroyed, but its influence hadn't vanished completely. What if the changes it had caused were irreversible? What if Chris was still alive, driven by instincts they couldn't understand? "We need to leave," Daniel said finally, breaking the silence. "This place isn't safe anymore." Emily nodded weakly. "But where do we go? We're miles from anywhere, and we don't even know if help is coming." Rachel pulled out her satellite phone, which had miraculously survived the chaos. She dialed the number for the nearest military outpost, explaining their situation in short, urgent sentences. The operator promised a rescue team would arrive within hours, but until then, they were on their own. As they waited, the group decided to gather supplies from the remains of the facility. They moved cautiously through the debris, careful not to disturb anything unstable. The once pristine lab was now a mess of twisted metal and shattered glass. Every step felt like walking through a graveyard, a reminder of how close they had come to disaster. While searching for food and medical kits, Rachel noticed something strange. In the corner of the lab, partially buried under rubble, was a small fragment of the artifact. It wasn't glowing anymore, but its surface shimmered faintly in the dim light. Her stomach churned as she realized it might still hold some residual energy. If it did, it could be dangerous. Without hesitation, she picked it up and dropped it into a secure container, sealing it tightly. She didn't say anything to the others. She didn't want to alarm them. But she knew this piece needed to be studied carefully later. By midday, the sound of helicopter blades broke the silence. A military chopper descended through the clouds, kicking up snow as it landed nearby. Soldiers poured out, weapons ready, and quickly assessed the situation. One officer approached the group, his face stern. "We'll get you out of here," he said, "but we need to know everything that happened." Rachel stepped forward, her voice steady despite her nerves. "It's complicated," she began. "There was an alien artifact. It changed one of our team members, and we had to destroy it before it caused more damage." The officer listened intently, nodding occasionally. When she finished, he glanced at the ruined facility, then back at her. "You made the right call," he said, "but this isn't over. Whatever that thing was, it's not the first of its kind. We've seen similar reports in other parts of the world. Someone, or something, is experimenting on us." The word sent a chill down Rachel's spine. She hadn't considered that the artifact might be part of something bigger, a larger pattern of alien interference. As the soldiers helped them board the helicopter, she clutched the container holding the fragment tightly. She knew she couldn't let this go. There were still questions that needed answers. As the chopper lifted off, Rachel looked out the window at the icy wilderness below. Somewhere out there, Chris might still be alive, transformed into something neither human nor animal. And though the artifact was gone, its shadow loomed large. Whatever secrets it held, Rachel vowed to uncover them, not just for herself, but for humanity's sake.